Thank you for listening to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast, available on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Stitcher. Also, please follow Matt's Movie Reviews on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Reddit, Instagram, and MeWe. And of course, be sure to visit mattsmoviereviews.net for the latest reviews, top 10 lists, and more. Now, on to the show.
We got a letter saying, denied, you have 15 days to leave the country. Ultimately, every cell in my body was telling me to get on that horse and ride home.
When Filipe told me he was going to do Canada to Brazil, I didn't believe.
That's why 95% of the people who have ever written me never set off.
It just got stronger and stronger the older I got. I was very scared, very scared. Just convincing people that a 20-some-year-old kid who had no previous experience long riding could pull off one of the longest and most arduous rides of the 21st century. And that's when my life fell apart.
Estoy descendo de Canadá até Brasil a caballo. Loco, no.
The bruiser started barking and threw me off. Got a huge slit in my pants. I think my finger is broken.
The deepest scars I have in my soul came from all that time that I spent alone. It's the perfect recipe for craziness.
So this is Naomi. I'm going to take her on one last ride and hopefully she'll make it all the way to Brazil with me.
Of course, there's always the traditional challenges of mountains, jungles, disease, insects, carnivorous beasts, and very dangerous human beings.
Bruiser's stuck in a big hole behind us. Come on, Bruiser. Come on,
Are you the guy that's riding to South America?
Yeah.
Well, good luck, man.
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 442. Currently doing the festival rounds in the US is The Long Rider, a documentary that tells the story of journalist and horseman Filipe Leite, who in 2012 undertook a 25,000-kilometer journey from Calgary, Canada, to his family's home in Brazil. A film almost 10 years in the making, The Long Rider is the chronicle of a dream that became a journey and a journey that became a pilgrimage, told with startling intimacy and impressive craft. And joining me today to talk about The Long Rider is the film's director, Sean Cisterna. Sean, I thank you so very much for your time today.
Thank you, Matt. It's an honor being here.
It's really interesting just looking at Filipe's story. So let's just put this into the context as to what exactly is happening here with his story. So he was born in Brazil, but then he and his family moved to Canada when he was 9 years old. But then there's this struggle for his family and himself to gain permanent residency, they call it. Is that pretty much the thing that kind of like spurred on this kind of journey of his? Because I know it's always a dream, but so usually with a dream, you need something to kind of kickstart it into gear, isn't it? Is that kind of like the thing where he said, well, if I might need to leave the country, I'm going to do it in my way, and my way is to do it on horseback. Is that pretty much the way that kind of went down with Filipe?
I think you got it. Yeah, I mean, maybe the long burning spark was the book that he read as a kid, Shifley's Ride. It's a story that his father used to read to him about this 1925 era Swiss school teacher who rode horseback from Buenos Aires, Argentina, all the way to the United States. So Filipe grew up with this myth, this legend, even though it's a real thing that happened in the 1920s. But I think that permanent residency issue was the ignition part of that spark that was kind of just slowly burning. And if it wasn't for that moment in Filipe's family's history, then we may not have a documentary today.
So when it comes to the story of Aim Shifley and the whole Shifley Ride kind of thing, I find it interesting that sometimes there are things in our lives, whether it be a horseman like Filipe or be a creative person like yourself, a writer like myself, there are things in our lives that kind of just borrow into our consciousness and kind of just stick in there, and it kind of develops who we want to be and what we want to do with our lives. For myself, it was when I first saw Serpico once late at night on TV, the Sidney Lumet film. Before then, I watched movies, but post that, I became a film fan. Like I wanted to dive into everything film and then write about film. And then, 15, 20 years later, here I am. What about for yourself, Sean? Do you have a movie or a moment in your career, prior to your career, that really spoke to you, and kind of like how the Aim Schiffley story spoke to Filipe, that made you want to say, you know what, I want to be a filmmaker? And can you know if there was a certain film or a filmmaker or a moment in film that kind of did that for you?
Oh yeah, I can pinpoint it. It's it has nothing to do with the Long Rider, but when I was like 13, I saw The Exorcist for the first time, and that was
one of my favorite films.
When I really started paying attention to the craft of filmmaking. I mean, if you I don't know if you work in film or not, but when you are on a film set and you divide the script into different departments, I mean, every department in The Exorcist just kind of used the utmost creativity to bring that story to life. Like the makeup team, had a backstory behind the makeup. So Linda Blair's character used the crucifix to put scars in your face, and the sound team, they infused the soundtrack with the buzzing of flies throughout the film, and very creative ways to bring the demon's voice to life by tying Mercedes McCambridge, a voice actor, to a chair and feeding her raw eggs just to produce these vocalizations. So, I mean, every department in that film just came together to adhere to the themes of that story. And that's when I really started to pay attention to the craft of filmmaking, for sure.
Interestingly enough, The Exorcist came out the same year as Serpico in 1973. So, you and I are pretty much on the same kind of starting points there.
That was my golden age of cinema, for sure.
Absolutely. I think so too. When it comes to how you came across with Filipe's story, how did you know about his story? By that time, did his book already come out? Did you find out about it from his book? Did you see press about it? Or did this kind of documentary kind of thing kind of happen? Did he reach out? So you had it all kind of come about.
So I knew Filipe about 10 years before this journey even happened. So we went to the same high school together in a small little rural community in Caledon, East Ontario, Canada. So our former teachers introduced us. He was 16. I had just come back to do like a guest speaking gig at the high school. And that's where our former teachers kind of introduced us. So when, a few years later, when Filipe undertook this journey, I followed it online. It was as it was happening in real time and kind of putting the pieces together. And it wasn't until he got to like Mexico or Guatemala that, I kind of put together the chronology of what happened with this family's, residency issues and why he was going about on this journey. And I knew that, if he were to make it to Brazil alive and kind of live to tell the tale, then it would be a story that I wanted to reach out and connect with him on. And thankfully, he saw the great potential in what he did. And thank God he had the foresight to film everything along his journey. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a film that's so striking to look at today. Interestingly,
though, the original plan was to make a feature film, like a feature narrative film, wasn't it? How far along in the process were you with that before you moved along to kind of like the documentary road?
I think in 2017 or 2018, I connected with him again and optioned the right to his first book called Long Ride Home, which tells that epic story from Canada to Brazil on horseback. And I raised some money for it. I financed the development of the film through the funding system here in Canada. And, by early 2020, we had an awesome draft of the script ready to go at a partner in Brazil. And then COVID happened and borders were shut down. We could no longer do this co-production between Canada and Brazil. So all that work kind of went on hold. And then Filipe said, well, I got all this footage just sitting in a hard drive somewhere. Maybe we could do a documentary first. And so that was our COVID project. Not only was it, selfishly a way for me to spend that, those early days in the pandemic kind of researching and watching all the film footage from Filipe just to make the narrative version a bit more rich. and lush, but the footage was so incredibly compelling that it stands on its own as an amazing documentary. So I think that the two can kind of exist side by side in the eventual marketplace when the narrative comes out, whenever that may be.
From what I read, Filipe had a GoPro with him, he had a couple of cameras as well. And all of this kind of during this 2 years, I should say, journey accumulated to 500 hours of footage. It's your job as the filmmaker getting there with your editor and dwindle down that 500 hours to a 90-minute feature. Okay, so what's the first kind of thing that you kind of say to yourself in order to do that? Do you already kind of have an idea of the structure that you want to undertake? Are there some parts of the journey you want to focus more than others? I mean, how do you go about dwindling down 500 hours of footage down to 90 minutes? I mean, it seems like such an incredible feat. It's to me, it's like it's a journey within itself. Because what they say, a lot of times that the film is not made until it's hidden into the editing room. Yeah,
that's a great question. So honestly, it all started with a bit of a map that I kind of put up on a wall. I had a map that I bought. I highlighted the route that Filipe took to get from his family from Calgary to Brazil. And I knew I needed a bit of setup at the beginning, maybe 10 minutes worth of setup to kind of tell the story of why he's going on this journey. And then, I just followed the map. And if some of the footage did not directly fall on that timeline of the journey, if he kind of went on a tangent for a bit and learned a new skill or something like that, it just seemed extraneous and had to make the cutting room floor. So there was a bit of a self-imposed rule to continue to propel the story forward and use the actual map as an outline for progressing the story forward.
It's interesting that there are certain themes and things that come up when watching the film. I think the first thing that I think a lot of people are really going to cling to in a lot of ways is the story, not only of Filipe, but it's the journey of the horses as well. The horses have very much characters in the film, and it's funny how Filipe kind of he describes the horses in the context of, say, like pop culture people. So the horses in Frenchie, Bruiser, and Dude. And from what I can remember, I think he called Frenchie the Dwayne Johnson of the group, because he's big and he's strong and he's good looking, but he's kind of stubborn as well, and he's like takes no nonsense. Dude, I think he called the 007 of the group. I think it was Dude. I'm not sure it was Dude or Bruce. I'm pretty sure it was Dude that he called that. So anyway, it's like there's a connection that he has with these horses, and as we're watching the journey, we're feeling the connection with them as well. His background is very much he's a horseman. His father was a horseman. He grew up with horses. What about you yourself? Did you have any experience with horses at all? And if not, when you're watching this documentary, do you have a different perspective about these animals in regards to, just what they are, especially in the development of humankind? I mean, at the start of the documentary, Filipe is talking about horses were used to do pretty much everything until the automobile came along. And I think it's something that people kind of forget about in our recent human development.
Yeah, that was basically my horse understanding as well, like learning everything through Filipe's eyes. Like I am not a horse person myself. I wouldn't know how to saddle a horse. I can barely get on one, but I appreciate those millions of people around the world who have that strong bond with the equestrian way of life. I don't think you need to be a horse person to love this film. I've heard from different festival goers every time we screen it. Certainly there are a lot of horse people that come out, but if it reminds people of their dogs at home who convey that loyalty to their companion, their human companions, I mean, that's relatable in and of itself. I think just because I'm not a horse person, I just wanted to ensure we made a film that it was more universal in nature and didn't solely focus on the equestrian community, because I do think it's a universal story, especially at times like these where it's so there's always such darkness in the news, and after a long 2 years of pandemia, like I just wanted to create something that audiences can kind of embrace and root for an underdog character to succeed in their quest. I think that's kind of important for times right now.
I think that the other thing that I took from the movie is that Filipe pretty much encounters the spectrum of humanity through like the lowest of characters to like the most alluring and the most charitable as well. In fact, I think there was a quote that he had that I have here that he received a bachelor's in journalism in Canada, but it took him to get on a saddle to have a master's in humanity, which I think is a really interesting kind of quote right there. When you're watching this footage and you're seeing some of the interactions that he's having, especially with the more hairier aspects of humanity, when he hits these more kind of like Mexico and South American countries where there are drug cartels and where they can, it's funny, there's a part in the film where he says, I'm going to Mexico, and friends of his says, oh, you're going to get killed in Mexico. It was like, and he was offended. It's like, oh, how dare you say that? You've never been to Mexico. And then he goes to Mexico and the locals there. So like, you're going to get killed in Mexico. That's some, it's funny, but it's kind of shocking at the same time. As you're watching the footage, even though you know that at the end of it, Filipe, for the most part, comes out of it unscathed, are you still kind of like, what the hell is going to happen next? Kind of gripping your seat, kind of, experience that I and I'm not sure a lot of other people are going to have as well when it comes to some of these conflicts and scenarios that he finds himself in?
There are often audible gasps in the theater when you watch it with a large community of people. So I think it is quite shocking. We've been taught to I don't know, like fear the unknown of people in these not so oft traveled countries like Honduras and Nicaragua. But very, very quickly you can get the sense that no matter where Filipe is on his journey, it's people are responding to his character and his dream to get back home to his family. And I think no matter who you are, like everybody wants to help that person who's far away from home to get back home to their loved one. So it's a testament to everybody out there who has been able and kind enough to help Filipe on his journey, because as Filipe says in the film, humanity is good at its core. And I can just remember we screened in Los Angeles the other day at the Chinese theater, and we had people wiping their eyes at that moment. It was almost like a pat on the back for humanity, and I think people needed that reassurance to hear such almost like an epic figure on the big screen to tell all of us in the audience how we are good at our core, and we would help our fellow human if they needed it.
Absolutely, because he's sometimes finding himself in the middle of nowhere in situations that are beyond anything that he can handle. And oftentimes he would say that he met a group of people beforehand, he'd have their number, he can call them up and they'll come help him. And I think, it goes back to that saying from Streetcar Named Desire, sometimes you can rely on the kindness of strangers. And I think it really, really comes to the fore there in your movie. The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by 80s Tees. 80s Tees is an online retailer of licensed t-shirts and pop culture gear from your favorite movies, TV shows, cartoons, video games, comic books, and musicians. Celebrate your inner 80s nerd and click on the link in the show notes below to get the raddest retro t-shirts delivered to your door. The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Loot Crate. Founded in 2012, Loot Crate is the worldwide leader in fan subscription boxes. Loot Crate partners with industry leaders in entertainment, gaming, sports, and pop culture to deliver monthly themed crates, produce interactive experiences in digital content, and film original video productions. No matter what you geek out about, Loot Crate has a subscription box for you. To get your very own exclusive collectibles, apparel, and gear delivered to your door, be sure to click on the link in the show notes below. The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by TeePublic. TeePublic is the world's largest marketplace for independent creators to sell their work on the highest quality merchandise. With over 1.2 million designs, TeePublic is sure to have something you love. Another thing I took from the movie, it's something I'm sure we all know of, is just that how frustrating bureaucracy is, especially when it comes to reaching borders. And I think it was when he was in Panama, he was there for like 6 months or so before he can even go into Brazil. I mean, that's just crazy in its own. And in one sense, you could kind of understand how governments might be, what's the word I'm looking for? Have their guard up in regards to some type of travel involving horses and maybe some type of diseases or viruses that might come in there. On the other hand, though, it's just such an incredibly frustrating experience, I'm sure, for him, especially when he's given the runaround so many times and he has to pay this amount of money and that amount of money. I found a quote by Albert Einstein, of all people, which said that bureaucracy is the death of all sound work. And I think it's a really kind of good kind of a illustration in your movie just how that is. I'm sure yourself as a filmmaker, though, who has to work with, financiers, production companies, local councils, distributors, etc., that you might have, you yourself might also have felt that the pinch of bureaucracy as well. It's something that you can definitely kind of relate to when it comes to Filipe's journey.
I think long riders and filmmakers face the same sort of barriers for sure. We often have to appeal to the better side of government bodies to get what we kind of need to propel our projects forward or our beings forward. But we're often at the mercy of those governments to make those decisions. But the challenge for Filipe was that these rules seem to be made up on the spot if they immediately clear. So if you can imagine being detained at a border but not having a guideline as to how to get across that border, that imaginary line on a map as he calls it. But so when you're faced with an obstacle like that, you sometimes have to resort to other means to get your horses across safely. And these aren't just horses that he considers them as their family. So it's like Filipe truly believes like his horses are his kids, at least in his heart, and he would not leave his 3 children, Frenchie, Bruiser, and Dude, behind. There was a cross. If he had to seek help through alternative means to cross a border, I mean that was an option.
I mean, those alternative means that you speak of sometimes involves dealing with dubious figures. Members of drug cartels. In one case, I imagine a quite high-ranking member, considering he couldn't do shooting new footage, and this guy's mansion stuck in the middle of nowhere, South America, looked very imposing. Interestingly, though, these people who, and by all accounts, could very much be criminals and not have best intentions for a lot of people, they treated Filipe with very much respect, because I think they saw what he was doing and kind of like the mysticism of the West and the cowboy and riding on a horse. I think it touched a lot of different people in a lot of ways. What do you think it is about the Western? I mean, interestingly enough, this is like I've watched 2 Westerns in the past week. They're actually pretty good, very different movies, but new movies, new Westerns. Not counting your movie as well as one of those Westerns, because it's a documentary. I'm talking about feature films, but then you count your film in there as well, where you see the real Western kind of like journey in action. What do you think it is about the Western that kind of like speaks to so many different people? Is it just a heroicism that goes with it? Is it the link to history? When it comes to maybe like the countries that Filipe was writing for, is there a cultural aspect or religious aspect to it? What do you think that kind of aspect kind of moves people so much that they would give Filipe almost kind of like the type of treatment where it just feels like he's like a beetle or something, and he's riding down the road and there's like thousands of people behind him following on horseback as well. It's remarkable to see.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. For me, it's the fact that you don't come in with any preconceived notion about yourself that you're better than someone else. You rely on the kindness of strangers, the earth which you're walking on, and you're not buried in a cell phone as you are traveling through this through one's community. So you're actually engaging with your fellow human. You're clearly on a quest that isn't you're self-grandiosing. You're just you're a steward of the land, and I think that's a romantic thing that we should all try to maybe employ in our lives a little bit. Detach from the computer and the Zoom chats and the and your screens for a bit, and connect with the land. And I think it's just a noble thing that you don't quite see this day and age. And so I think people have responded to that in Filipe's quest.
Something that I really responded to. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, just that the whole journey was there. There wasn't a single car that he kind of took to propel himself from one city to another. It all had to be, on horseback unless there was a major obstacle. And so I think that is just such a Odyssean sort of quest that you don't see these days. And I think even the hardest of criminals kind of respected his tenacity and wherewithal to make that happen.
And one thing that really incredibly spoke to me is that it seemed like this film, as I said in my this journey, as I said in my introduction, became very much kind of like a spiritual pilgrimage for Filipe. So he started off saying in the documentary that he started off the journey as an atheist and he ended up as a believer. And there are cultural aspects to that. Of course, his background is Brazilian. His father is a very religious man, I think, of the Catholic religion, of course, when it comes to Brazilians and such. But it seems to me that he really did feel that the spirits were with him throughout this journey. And interesting as well that he was actually carrying the ashes of another rider with him, the sister of a man, one of those kind strangers that helped him along the way. And he felt that really her spirit was kind of like a guiding force in a lot of that. How did you kind of like look at that as well in regards to not only his journey, but also as a really cool kind of way to tell the story as well? I think it's a really cool way to kind of bring an arc to Filipe's character on the screen. And really does work in regards to, we're talking about going from point A to point B in regards to a physical journey, but there's definitely like a spiritual aspect to it as well, I think.
Yeah. I think with all the time spent alone on the road, I think Filipe needed to have that belief that something else was perhaps looking out for him or guiding him in some capacity. And I think that's, if it hadn't been for his reading of Shifley's Ride when he was, a young child, he wouldn't have had Shifley kind of looking out for him, or that knowledge that he imparted at the dangerous times upon his quest, where he could hearken back to what he learned to help save him in a predicament. Or to have Naomi's ashes there, this guardian angel figure that he could kind of talk to along the journey. I mean, almost think of it like Wilson in Castaway, kind of have that inanimate object to share a journey with, without having that outlet to continually speak to or share your thoughts with along this journey. I think it would drive anyone insane, and I think Filipe needed that, regardless of your own personal spiritual beliefs. That worked for Filipe, and that helped him get through the most difficult of situations.
So Filipe, this is the first of 3 long rides that Filipe kind of undertook. Is there potential of doing 3 documentaries to chronicle all of these? I mean, did he shoot footage for those other long rides as well? Have you talked to him? Is there any plans in regards to having those placed on film as well? Because I know he's got books about him, but I love to see more films, especially looking at a Filipe who, not to give anything away, but after this particular journey, he went from some real personal and psychological struggles, and it'd be interesting to see exactly what Filipe what came out of that and went back on horseback again. Because I think, once we watch that 90-minute journey, it kind of feels like, we are with him in many ways. As not only see him as a personality on the screen, but him as a human being. I think it's just really interesting to see how that journey kind of develops.
I mean, it's strange. I've been reading some of the reviews that have been coming up from different festivals, and we had one reviewer said it was too short. They wished it was longer, and that's never a quote that I hear in any sort of review. They were involved so much in the storytelling. They wish they had more. So that's always an amazing compliment to get as a filmmaker. But what the challenges, just even though there's hours upon hours of footage, we just wanted to tell that journey in one sort of documentary. We have more time in the narrative to work on 3 separate journeys, should the first one be a hit and the documentary find a wider audience, because Filipe wrote 3 different books, one from Canada to Brazil, one that tells his journey from Brazil to the southern tip of Argentina, and one from Alaska back to Calgary, kind of where it all began. So each journey has its own, kind of hero's quest that kind of fits perfectly, aligns perfectly with the Greek myths of the past almost, and we can kind of follow that template and create interesting new and interesting ways of telling that story. So I think we'll have to save the trilogy for the narrative version and make it a big kind of spectacle.
When it comes to getting that film out there, I know you just had the premiere at Dances with Films Festival in LA, and you were just talking about the Man's Chinese Theatre. You were showing the film there, which I'm sure would have been spectacular because of just the cultural aspect of it. As a filmmaker, you would have been a great opportunity for you to show your film there, and it would have been a great experience as well. What other plans are there to get the film out there? Are we looking at more festivals? Have we any news yet in regards to distribution or anything of that sort? Because I can't imagine that no one wouldn't want to get their hands on this movie, because I think it's just terrific. I think it's a movie that a lot of people will get a lot out of, because it's just one of those documentaries that's really life affirming and spiritually affirming, and just something that people really need to see, I think.
Oh, Matt, I wish I could hire you as a gatekeeper of some kind, because that's a beautiful thing to say. Yeah, I mean, that's my thought as well. I do think the world is primed for this sort of material. Like I said, especially after, suffering through 2 years of being socially distant. I mean, here's a film that comes along that makes everybody feel good, and you get to experience travel in a way that, hasn't been done before. And it's very difficult now to cross borders and to take flights and to deal with airplanes. But through Filipe's story, we get to experience these different cultures and communities along this journey. But so we were waiting for our Hollywood premiere to kind of kickstart the distribution process. So we have distribution in Canada already lined up. We hit theaters here in Canada at the end of the month. And then we just brought on a US sales agent for them to start doing their work to bring it to the rest of the world. So, Canada's covered. That's how we kind of financed the film and made it, but the rest of the world is now open. And I think our salespeople will do a fantastic job connecting with like-minded countries in not only the English-speaking world, but the Spanish-speaking world, the Portuguese-speaking world, those who respect horse culture. There's a love story in there. There's a family story. So I think it'll resonate in a lot of cultures around the world.
Well, for everyone out there listening, if The Long Rider does come your way in the festivals or any aspect, I really encourage people to check it out. You can actually go to Facebook and Instagram. The Long Rider pages are available there for people to check out and see any type of updates. And you can also go to www.longriderfilm.com for updates as well in regards to the film. And I really recommend, people do check this film out if it does come their way, because it's an incredible journey. It really is. And it's just a movie that really, I don't know, there's something about it that really kind of, maybe it's just the mythological aspect of the Western, or just Filipe's journey, or just the intimacy about it in a way that you guys put it together. I mean, to put together 2 years worth of journey in like that many 100 hours into a 90-minute feature is an incredible feat on its own. And to see it all come together in the way that yourself, Sean, did it, and the way that Filipe kind of shot it and such, I think it's really an incredible film. So I really do hope nothing but the best for you in getting this out there and getting that distributor. And because it's worthy, more than worthy to out there. Because trust me, I've seen some really, really bad films get those deals, and your film is exceptionally good. It's one of my favorite films of the year so far, and I really do hope nothing but the best for you, Sean. And thank you so much for your time today. It's been fantastic.
Oh, that's really a beautiful thing to say, Matt. I appreciate it. Everybody has a dream, and as Filipe says, you need to take that first step. Without taking that first step, you're never going to accomplish your dream, no matter how big or small it is. So I think that's the ultimate message that this film has, and everybody out there does have their own personal dream. So yeah, thank you for your kind words.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content. Also, if you would like to request a review and support my work, please join my Patreon via the link in the description below.